I showed up to my mother's will reading, expecting nothing. They said I didn't belong. But when my son revealed her final secret, the whole room changed. This is the story of how truth found its voice through me. The day Elena returned to her father's house wasn't supposed to matter. Not to her, not to anyone, and definitely not to the people already inside. She hadn't planned to go. She hadn't even known about the will reading until an envelope, no return address, no message landed in her mailbox. Just a date, a time, and the name of her father's lawyer, printed in that cold, clinical font that always accompanied legal things. Elena held it for 2 days before saying a word to anyone. And when she finally told her mother, Marisol, that she was thinking of throwing it away, her mother simply looked up and said, "Go." That one word landed heavier than any lecture, but her mother added softly, "You don't need anything from them, but maybe there's something you need to hear." Elena didn't want to go. The very thought of walking back into that house, the one she'd left years ago, the one that shut its doors on her when she was at her lowest, made her stomach twist. But her mother had never been wrong about moments like this. So Elena nodded, packed her black dress, and went. She didn't know it then, but listening to her mother that day would change everything. The door was heavy, old mahogany, polished until it reflected the morning light like it was trying to stay important. Elena stood in front of it for 5 full seconds, just long enough to breathe, just long enough to remember why she hadn't walked through it in years. Then she pushed it open. The air inside was colder than she expected, not from the temperature, but from the energy. It smelled like cologne, cigar smoke, leather, and resentment, like wealth trying to disguise bitterness. And every pair of eyes in the room turned to her, not with curiosity, not with warmth, but with something worse: expectation. They expected her to fail, to flinch, to walk back out the same way she'd come in, quiet, ashamed, invisible. And before she even reached the table, her sister made sure everyone remembered why. She'll get nothing. Dad hated her. Sophia said it loud enough to echo, like she wanted it to. Elena paused, but only for a second. She didn't look at Sophia. She looked at her mother, standing next to her in quiet defiance. Marisol's voice was calm but resolute. "Ignore them, honey. Sit down. This isn't about them." So Elena did what she always did when the world pushed too hard. She listened to her mother. She sat at the far end of the long, dark wood table, away from the center, away from the power. Victor, her father's brother, gave a dry chuckle from his spot near the fireplace. "Even her kid knows she's worthless," he muttered, glancing at Elena's son like he was an afterthought. Elena's jaw clenched. Her son Liam was only 9, but he heard it. He always heard it. His little hand found hers under the table, fingers trembling, trying not to cry. Elena smiled at him, thin, tight, shaky, but it was the only armor she had. They sat there, at the very edge of the family tree, like 2 names scribbled in pencil, easy to erase. And they waited. Not for justice, not for forgiveness, just for the reading of a will. But the truth? None of them, not Sophia, not Victor, not even Elena, knew that the youngest person in the room was the one who'd brought the storm with him. And before they left that room, every single person would remember exactly what happened the day Elena decided to listen. Not to her sister, or her uncle, or even her father's voice inside her head, but to the only voice that had never turned its back on her, her mother's. The lawyer arrived 10 minutes late, but no one dared complain. Mr. Carter was the kind of man who walked into a room and made it feel smaller, not because he was intimidating, but because he was necessary. He wore a charcoal suit, carried a thick leather folder, and had the kind of expression that came from years of seeing families torn apart over money. He nodded politely to the room, then took his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice dry as dust. "Let's begin." The air felt heavier than before. Elena sat still, back straight, one hand resting on Liam's knee. He sat like a statue beside her, quiet, observant, and far too calm for a child his age. The first few lines of the will were exactly what Elena expected. Legalese, property descriptions, executor instructions. It all blurred together. Then came the names. "To my daughter Sophia," Mr. Carter read, "I leave the primary residence and all its contents." Sophia didn't smile. She didn't have to. Her entire body shifted, just slightly, like she was adjusting her crown. "To my brother Victor, the lake house, and all shares in the family business." Victor leaned back, folding his arms across his chest, smug satisfaction written all over his face. To my nephew Ethan, the vintage car collection. Ethan, the cousin who once locked Elena out of her bedroom when she was 12, grinned like he'd just won the lottery. Elena felt her stomach twist, but she didn't look at any of them. She focused on the wood grain of the table, on the steady rise and fall of Liam's breath. And then it came. As previously declared, my daughter Elena shall receive no portion of this estate. There it was. No apology, no explanation, just a sentence. A sentence sharp enough to cut through years of silence. Elena's fingers tightened around the fabric of her skirt. Her mother didn't speak. She didn't even flinch. But then, softly, under the table, Liam reached out. His small hand found hers again. It was the only warmth in the room. The whispers came next. "Told you," Sophia said to her husband, voice low but smug. "Takes a certain kind of person to walk away from her own father," Victor said, loud enough for everyone to hear. And still, Elena didn't move. She wanted to leave, wanted to walk out and never look back. But she didn't, because her mother hadn't moved either. And that was the moment everything changed. Because without a word, without a sound, Marisol, Elena's mother, stood up. Slow, deliberate, steady. She reached into her purse, pulled out a sealed white envelope, and walked to the lawyer. "Henry gave me this," she said calmly. "He told me to give it to you if things got ugly." Mr. Carter took the envelope, frowning slightly. The room stilled. Sophia shifted uncomfortably. Victor leaned forward. Elena held her breath. Inside the envelope was a flash drive and one handwritten note. Mr. Carter read it quietly, then looked up, his voice suddenly softer. "There is a video," he said, "recorded by Mr. Garcia before the final version of this will. Authenticated, time-stamped. He asked that it only be played in the event of conflict." His eyes flicked toward Sophia, toward Victor, and finally, toward Elena. "I believe this qualifies." And then he hit play. The laptop screen flickered. At first, it was just black. Then a small white word appeared. Play. No one spoke. No one breathed. Mr. Carter's hand hovered over the mouse for a moment, then clicked. The image blinked, and there he was. Henry Garcia, Elena's father. Older than she remembered, thinner, grayer. His once proud posture softened by age, but his presence still sharp enough to silence the room. He sat at his old desk, the one with the brass corners and the antique globe behind it. He was wearing the navy sweater Elena had bought him for his birthday years ago, the one she never thought he'd kept. "Hi, Elena," he began, voice low, uneven. Elena's breath caught. She felt her chest tighten. She hadn't heard him say her name in years. "If you're watching this, I'm gone." And I imagine things at the table got ugly. He sighed, folded his hands on the desk. "I didn't record this to scold anyone, or explain the estate. That's all in writing. I recorded this because I made a mistake, a big one." His eyes lowered. "I believed what Sophia told me. I believed Victor. I believed that you left because you didn't care. I didn't ask questions. I didn't listen. And I pushed you out." Elena stared at the screen, frozen. Her fingers dug into the chair's armrest. "I shut the door on you when you showed up with Liam and a suitcase and nowhere else to go. I told myself I was protecting the family, but I wasn't. I was protecting my pride." He swallowed hard. "You were right to leave that marriage. You were right to walk away when no one stood beside you. I thought strength meant staying silent, that being a man meant being right, no matter the cost." He looked directly at the camera, then his voice trembled. "But strength is showing up. And you did. You raised your boy on your own. You built a life. You did what I didn't have the courage to do for you or your mother." Marisol sat beside Elena, eyes closed, silent, but a single tear had slipped down her cheek. "I met Liam once," Henry continued, "just him and me. He told me something that shattered me. He said, 'My mom is the safest place in the world.'" Elena's hand flew to her mouth. Her vision blurred. "That day, I realized I hadn't just lost a daughter. I'd lost something sacred. I had a second chance and I almost threw it away again." He leaned in slightly. "So, I changed the will." Gasps rippled through the room. Sophia's chair screeched. Victor muttered something under his breath. But Elena couldn't hear them. "I've left the house to you and Liam, the savings, the retirement fund. There's a college trust for him. I know it doesn't erase what I did, but I want you to have what I never gave you when I was alive. Peace, stability, home." He paused. "If they're angry about it, let them be. You earned this. You survived every room they shut you out of. You never stopped being a mother. And that's something to be proud of." His voice cracked again. His eyes shone. "I'm proud of you, Elena. I love you. I always did. I just didn't know how to show it." And then, softer than before, just before the screen faded to black, "Tell Liam, thank you." The screen went dark, and the room fell utterly, completely silent. Elena didn't move, didn't speak. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't wipe them away. Liam sat beside her, still as stone, his small hand slipping into hers like it had always belonged there. She turned to look at her mother. Marisol didn't say a word. She just smiled. For a full minute, no one moved. The room, that had once been so loud with judgment and entitlement, was now completely silent. Not because they didn't want to speak, but because no one could. Sophia was the first to break. She stood up so fast her chair screeched across the hardwood floor. Her face was pale, lips tight. She grabbed her purse with trembling hands and stormed out without a word. Her husband followed a moment later, red-faced, muttering something about editing the will. No one listened. Victor stayed seated, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the dark screen. He looked like he wanted to say something, maybe argue, maybe shout. But even he knew there was nothing left to fight. Henry Garcia had spoken, and for once, he couldn't be ignored. The cousins began to shuffle awkwardly, casting sidelong glances at Elena, but unable to hold her gaze. Some nodded out of respect or guilt or shame. She couldn't tell. She didn't care, because for the first time in years, she felt heard. Mr. Carter closed the laptop slowly, folding the note from Henry with a care usually reserved for sacred things. "There will be some paperwork," he said softly, "but everything is in order." Elena nodded, but didn't speak. There were no words big enough to carry what was in her chest. The lawyer gave her a genuine smile, the kind that said, he saw it all too. Then he left. And just like that, it was only the three of them. Elena, her son, her mother. For a long moment, none of them said a thing. Elena stared at the table, the same polished wood that had once felt like a barrier, now just furniture. The silence wasn't cold anymore. It was whole, settled. She looked at Liam, her son, her witness, her quiet little soldier. He looked up at her with that same small smile, the one he'd always had, the one that never needed words. "Thank you," she whispered. He tilted his head. "For what?" "For being braver than me. For holding on to something that mattered." He didn't respond with words. He just leaned his head against her arm, soft and sure. Elena turned to her mother then, and for the first time in a long time, she felt like a daughter. "If you hadn't told me to go..." Marisol met her eyes. "But you did go," she said gently, "because you listened, like you always do, even when it hurts." Elena smiled, her eyes still full of tears, but no longer from pain. "You've always believed me." Her mother nodded. "I didn't need proof. I had you." They stayed a little longer, not because they had to, but because, maybe for the first time, this room didn't belong to the past anymore. It belonged to them, to healing, to truth, to the quiet sound of a woman finally being seen. They walked out of the house slowly. The late afternoon sun was low, casting long golden streaks across the gravel driveway. The air felt different now, lighter, warmer. The kind of air you breathe deep into your lungs and feel it settle in your chest. Elena held Liam's hand in one and her mother's in the other. There was no applause, no triumphant music, just the sound of shoes on old wood and the soft click of the door closing behind them. But she wasn't walking out ashamed. She was walking out whole. She had come here expecting to be erased, to be humiliated, to be reminded that she didn't belong. Instead, she was given something she didn't even realize she still needed. Not money, not property, not even an apology, but acknowledgement. From a man who never said "I'm proud of you" when it mattered. From a family that called her a failure behind polished wine glasses. From a silence that had lived in her chest for years and finally broke. That night, back at home, Elena tucked Liam into bed like she always did. He was quiet, thoughtful. As she pulled the blanket up over his chest, he looked at her with his big, thoughtful eyes and asked, "Do you feel better now, Mom?" She paused, then smiled. "I feel seen." Liam nodded, like that made perfect sense. "He was wrong, you know," he said softly. "About you." "I know," she whispered, "but he saw it in the end, and that's something." Later, Elena sat on the edge of her bed, the copy of the will beside her. She didn't care about the house or the money. Not really. What she held on to was the video. That voice, that sentence. "I'm proud of you." It had echoed in her mind all evening, not just because she had waited years to hear it, but because it had come after she had stopped waiting. She hadn't needed it to become whole, but it meant something, because by the time it came, she had already saved herself. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't always arrive on time. It doesn't always come from the people you think it should. But when it shows up, when it's finally spoken, it changes everything. Elena didn't walk out of that house a victim. She walked out with her mother's hand in hers, with her son at her side, and her father's words still echoing in her chest. She walked out with her back straight, her head high, and a quiet, powerful peace. Because she had listened. Not to the noise, not to the doubt, not to the ones who never saw her, but to her mother. And that changed everything.